Sebastian sat at the small table by the window, his posture impeccable, his expression distant. Another lunch, another woman carefully chosen by his aunt, another conversation he had no intention of taking seriously. Across from him, the woman smiled politely, straightening her dress, clearly trying to make a good impression. She spoke about herself, her work, her interests, all the things he had already heard too many times before. Sebastian nodded at the right moments, but his mind was elsewhere. That was when she appeared. Livia. She moved between the tables with quiet confidence, a tray in her hands, her movements calm and natural. She wasn't trying to impress anyone. She simply did her job. And somehow, that made her impossible to ignore. For a brief second, her eyes met Sebastian's. It was nothing, just a glance, just a moment. But something in his chest shifted, sharp, unexpected, unwelcome. From the corner of the cafe, a woman watched everything in silence. Sebastian's aunt sat alone, her gaze sharp, observant. She noticed the change in his expression immediately, and she smiled. Sebastian acted before he had time to think. 1 second, he was still pretending to listen to the woman sitting across from him, nodding politely, smiling out of habit, and the next, his attention snapped toward Livia as she passed by the table. She moved quickly, focused on her work, unaware of the tension gathering behind her back. Impulsively, dangerously, Sebastian stood up. "Wait," he said, not to the woman at the table, but to Livia. She turned, confused, her brows knitting together as she met his gaze. And then it happened. He stepped closer, too close, close enough for her to feel his breath, close enough for the scent of coffee and something warm and familiar to wrap around them both. His hand closed around her wrist, firm, unexpected, pulling her toward him. Before Livia could understand what was happening, before she could even protest, Sebastian leaned in, his intention unmistakable. A kiss. Not gentle, not asked for. A reckless, desperate attempt to escape the situation he hated. Livia froze. For a split second, time seemed to stop. Her body went rigid, her heart slammed against her ribs, and shock flashed through her eyes. This wasn't part of her job. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a line crossed, brutally, suddenly. Sebastian was close enough now that she could see the tension in his jaw, the impatience in his eyes, the raw impulse that had driven him to this moment. And somewhere in the background, unnoticed by both of them, a woman watched. Sebastian's aunt sat a few tables away, her sharp gaze fixed on the scene unfolding before her. She saw everything, the grab, the hesitation, the way Sebastian's control slipped. And most importantly, she saw the reaction that told her this was not indifference. This was something far more dangerous. Silence fell over the cafe like a sudden weight. Sebastian stood frozen, his body tense, his expression unreadable. His hand hovered near his face, as if only now he realized how far he had crossed the line. Shock flickered in his eyes, not from the slap itself, but from the woman standing in front of him. Livia. She didn't step back. She didn't apologize. She didn't lower her gaze. She stood straight, her face flushed, her eyes burning with indignation and wounded pride. There was no fear in her expression, only resolve. She had defended herself, and she would not regret it. Beside Sebastian, the woman he had come with finally found her voice. "Are you serious?" she snapped, her tone sharp with humiliation. "Is this how you behave?" She gestured angrily between Sebastian and Livia, clearly outraged, not only by the scene, but by what it said about him. Sebastian didn't answer. For the first time in a long while, he didn't know what to say. Across the room, unnoticed by any of them, an elegant older woman observed everything from her table. Sebastian's aunt. Her gaze moved slowly from her nephew to the furious woman beside him, and finally to the young waitress who stood her ground without a trace of apology. A faint, thoughtful smile touched her lips. That girl wasn't afraid of him, and even more interesting, he wasn't indifferent to her. In that exact moment, a decision formed in her mind. A dangerous one, a clever one that would change all of their lives.
Livia had barely finished her shift when she noticed the woman waiting for her. She was elegant, composed, and clearly out of place among the noise of the cafe staff room. Her posture was calm, almost regal, the kind of calm that made Livia instinctively straighten her back. "You're Livia, aren't you?" the woman asked softly. Livia nodded, confused. "My name is Eleanor," she said. "I'm Sebastian's aunt." The name hit harder than Livia expected. "I saw everything," Eleanor continued, her eyes sharp but not unkind. "What happened today was unusual, and your reaction very telling." Livia felt heat rush to her cheeks. "I didn't plan any of it. I didn't even know who he was." Eleanor smiled faintly. "That," she replied, "is exactly why I wanted to speak with you." She paused, studying Livia closely, not as a stranger, but as someone measuring potential. "Sebastian doesn't notice women easily, but today you caught his attention completely." Livia swallowed, unease mixing with curiosity. "And sometimes," Eleanor said quietly, "attention can change everything."
The room was quiet, too quiet. Livia sat across from the woman who had summoned her, her fingers clenched tightly in her lap. The air smelled of expensive perfume and authority. This was not a place she belonged to, and they both knew it. "You surprised my nephew today," the woman said calmly, folding her hands on the desk. Her voice was smooth, controlled, dangerous in its politeness. "Very few people ever do." Livia lifted her chin. "I didn't plan anything. He crossed the line." A faint smile appeared on the woman's lips. "That line," she replied softly, "may change his entire future." She stood up and slowly walked toward the window, looking down at the city as if it were a chessboard. "My father built everything you see," she continued, "and Sebastian will inherit it, but only if he proves he can be a devoted husband." Livia's breath caught. "I don't understand why you're telling me this." The woman turned back to her, her gaze sharp now. "Because Sebastian does not fall in love," she said. "He controls, he resists, and most importantly, he hates being manipulated." Livia swallowed. "And yet," the woman continued, "you made him lose control in public. A single slap and I saw something I have never seen before." She leaned closer. "Emotion." Silence stretched between them. "I want you to work for him," the woman said at last, "as his personal assistant." Livia blinked in disbelief. "That's impossible." "No, it's calculated." She slid a folder across the desk. "You will stay close. You will be yourself, and you will make him fall in love with you." Livia's heart began to race. "And when he does?" The woman's smile returned, colder this time. "You will be paid very generously." Livia stared at the folder, her thoughts spinning. "And if he finds out?" she asked quietly. The woman paused. "He must never know," she said firmly, "because if Sebastian ever discovers that his love began with a lie, he will destroy everything." Livia looked down at the contract, and in that moment she felt it. This was not just a job. It was a trap. Livia's first day as Sebastian's assistant felt nothing like an ordinary job. From the very first minute, she was overwhelmed. Emails, calls, documents, meetings, everything came at once. People spoke quickly, expected answers immediately, and barely looked up as they passed her desk. Instructions changed mid-sentence. Deadlines appeared out of nowhere. She moved through the office non-stop, heels clicking against the marble floor, carrying folders, delivering messages, correcting schedules. She didn't complain. She didn't slow down. She focused. Sebastian watched all of this from a distance. He noticed how she listened carefully, how she asked precise questions, how she remembered details others ignored. She didn't flirt, she didn't seek attention, she simply worked, intensely, honestly, as if proving something to herself. More than once, their eyes met across the office. Each time, Livia quickly looked away, her cheeks warming for reasons she didn't fully understand. By the end of the day, exhaustion pressed against her shoulders, but so did a strange sense of pride. She had survived her first day. And somewhere between spreadsheets, hurried footsteps, and silent glances, something invisible had already begun to change. He lifted her without hesitation. Not carefully, not cautiously, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Her breath caught as his arm slid under her knees, the other firm around her back. For a split second, she forgot where she was. The office, the people, the contract, the rules. There was only the steady strength of his body and the warmth she hadn't expected to feel. Around them, everything froze. Conversations died mid-sentence. Glances followed them in stunned silence. This was Sebastian, the man everyone feared to interrupt, the man who never showed concern, never crossed professional lines. And now he was carrying his assistant through the open office as if nothing else mattered. "Don't move," he said quietly, his voice low, controlled, but not cold. "Your ankle." She nodded, fingers instinctively tightening against his jacket. Too close, too intimate, too dangerous. She could feel it, the shift, not just in him, in the room. People stared, confused, whispering with their eyes. Questions hung in the air, unspoken but loud. Since when does he look at anyone like that? Since when does he care? She lowered her gaze, heart pounding, because she knew the truth no one else did. This wasn't supposed to happen. He wasn't supposed to feel anything, and she was never supposed to forget why she was here. Yet in his arms, with his pulse steady beneath her cheek, the lie began to feel fragile. And terrifyingly, so did her control. The office froze. People stopped walking. Conversations died mid-sentence. Screens were forgotten. Sebastian never carried anyone. Not employees, not partners, not women. And now he was walking through the corridor with Livia in his arms, holding her carefully as if she were something fragile, something precious. Someone lowered their voice. Someone stared openly. Someone whispered his name in disbelief. Livia felt it too, the weight of their looks, the shock in the air. She tried to speak, to say she could walk, but Sebastian didn't slow down. "Don't," he said quietly. His voice wasn't sharp, it wasn't cold, it was firm and protective. He carried her into his office and gently placed her into a chair, kneeling in front of her without hesitation. His hands moved with calm precision, checking her ankle, calling for ice, ignoring the stunned silence behind the glass walls. Behind them, the office was buzzing. This was not the Sebastian they knew. And somewhere else, far from the open space and curious eyes, a woman watched. Aina stood by the window of her private office, her phone in her hand, her lips slowly curving into a knowing smile. She had seen everything. A moment later, Livia's phone vibrated. Unknown contact. "Careful, my dear, you're doing your job a little too well." Livia's breath caught. Her heart wasn't racing from pain anymore, it was racing from fear, because she suddenly understood something terrifying. Sebastian wasn't just playing his role anymore, and neither was she. Livia stopped the moment she saw them. Sebastian stood near the glass wall of the conference room, tall and composed, his posture as controlled as ever. Beside him was a woman Livia had never seen before, tall, elegant, with long dark hair cascading over her shoulders. The black dress clung to her figure effortlessly, confident, deliberate, unmistakably intimate. The woman laughed softly and leaned closer, her hand resting on Sebastian's arm as if it had always belonged there. Sebastian didn't pull away. He turned slightly toward the brunette, listening, answering calmly, politely, the way he always did. Nothing improper, nothing openly wrong, and yet every small movement felt like a quiet betrayal. Livia felt her chest tighten. She stood frozen, invisible, watching the way the woman looked at him, not like a stranger, not like a colleague, but like someone who already knew where she stood in his life, like someone who had been there before. This wasn't just another woman. This was his past, and suddenly Livia understood something terrifying. She wasn't jealous of what she saw. She was terrified of what she felt. Because for the first time, the idea of losing him wasn't theoretical, it was real, and it hurt far more than she was ready to admit. Livia sat down slowly, as if her body no longer trusted itself. Her fingers tightened around the edge of the table. She stared at her notebook, but the words blurred, dissolving into meaningless lines. Somewhere behind the glass, voices continued, calm and distant, as if nothing had changed. Her chest ached. She had told herself she was prepared for this, that this was only a contract, a role, a carefully calculated game where emotions had no place. And yet, in this moment, none of that mattered. Because what hurt wasn't what she saw. It was what she felt. The quiet realization settled inside her like a weight. She cared. Far more than she was supposed to, far more than she had allowed herself to admit. A single tear slipped down her cheek. She wiped it away quickly, almost angrily, afraid that if she let herself cry, she wouldn't be able to stop. She straightened her back, forcing her breathing to slow. No one here could see her break. No one was allowed to know. Not him, not them, and especially not the woman who had written the contract that bound her to this lie. Livia lifted her head. If this was the price of playing the role, she would pay it, in silence. Ainati didn't raise her voice. She never needed to. She sat back in her chair, one leg crossed over the other, her expression calm, almost bored. The city lights reflected softly in the glass behind her as she glanced at her phone. She had been watching. Not directly, not obviously, but closely enough. Her fingers moved across the screen with slow precision. A moment later, Livia's phone vibrated. A single message. No warmth, no hesitation. Ainati, remember why you're here. Livia's breath caught. Another message followed. Feelings were never part of the agreement. Livia closed her eyes. This was the other side of the story, the part no one else saw. The contract wasn't just about work, it was about control. And now, with Sebastian's past standing so close to his present, Ainati was reminding her of the truth Livia was trying so desperately to ignore. This wasn't a love story. It was a game. And Livia was expected to finish it, no matter what it cost her heart. Livia was starting to realize that what frightened her most wasn't exposure. It was the silence she would have to live in afterward. If the truth came out, it would hurt. If she walked away on her own, there would be emptiness. And for some reason, that emptiness felt far more terrifying. Sebastian had changed, and that scared her even more. He was no longer the cold executive who saw people as functions. His gaze lingered on her longer than politeness required. His hand brushed lightly against her back when they passed colleagues in the hallway. Sometimes he smiled, as if he forgot where he was. And every time it happened, something inside Livia tightened. Because this was real, and it had never started that way. That evening, after a long meeting, he said unexpectedly, "I'll drive you home." Livia wanted to refuse. She should have refused. Instead, she nodded, too quickly, as if she was afraid she might change her mind. The car was quiet. The city slid past the windows, lights and shadows reflecting in the glass. Sebastian drove in silence, but it wasn't tense. There was something intimate in it, almost dangerous, like a thin line they had both stepped onto without ever discussing it. "You're tired today," he said finally. It wasn't a question, it was a statement. Livia clenched her fingers on her knees. He saw too much. When the car stopped in front of her building, she felt it almost physically. This was the moment after which everything would change. Sebastian didn't rush to get out. He turned off the engine, but didn't lean back. Instead, he turned slightly toward her, resting his elbow on the steering wheel. He said her name quietly, carefully. "Livia." Her heart skipped. "Tell me one thing," he continued. "Are you here because you want to be here?" She froze. There it was, the question. Not about work, not about position, not about the contract, about her. Livia opened her mouth and couldn't say a word. Panic rose inside her, hot and sharp, like someone had suddenly pulled a thread she had been holding tight for far too long. Sebastian looked at her calmly, but there was a dangerous honesty in his eyes, the kind that leaves no place to hide. And at that moment, her phone vibrated. A message from his aunt. Livia lowered her eyes to the screen and felt herself drop back into reality, cold and unforgiving. "You're getting too close. Remember the conditions." The world snapped back onto its cruel rails. Livia looked up at Sebastian and lied. "Yes," she said, forcing her voice to stay steady. "Of course, I want to be here." The air inside the car felt heavier. Sebastian studied her for several seconds, long, carefully, as if trying to decide what to believe, her words or what he felt. "All right," he said quietly. And that "all right" sounded like a decision, or the decision being postponed. He stepped out of the car, walked around, and opened the door on her side. "Good night," he said. Livia stepped out slowly, her legs trembling. "Good night," she whispered. She closed the door, took a step back, and realized she couldn't leave, couldn't turn around and walk inside as if nothing had happened. Sebastian stood in front of her, and between them was that unbearable closeness that didn't need touch. "See you tomorrow," he said again, deliberately placing a final point. Livia nodded, turned sharply, and almost ran toward the building. Only once inside her apartment did she stop. With shaking hands, she removed her earrings, dropped her bag onto a chair, and rested her forehead against the cool window. The tears came suddenly, without permission. She loved him, and that was exactly what made the truth deadly. The next day, Sebastian arrived at the office later than usual. Livia noticed it immediately. She had started noticing everything connected to him, the way he loosened his control when she was nearby, and how quickly he put it back on when others were around. He walked past her desk, stopped briefly, and spoke without looking up from his tablet. "There's a corporate event tonight," he said calmly. "You're coming with me." It wasn't a question. It was a decision. Livia froze for half a second. "Of course," she replied, making sure her voice sounded steady. "After lunch, go by my place. Pick up my suit, a tuxedo, with a bow tie." She nodded. Only after he disappeared into his office did she allow herself to breathe. A corporate event, an evening, a public space where every look felt like a spotlight, where there was nowhere to hide. Sebastian's apartment was exactly like him, restrained, precise, controlled down to the smallest detail. Livia carefully took the tuxedo from the hanger, her fingers brushing the expensive fabric, and suddenly felt how close she had come to his life. Too close. Her phone vibrated. A message from his aunt. "The evening is important. I've already taken care of your appearance." Livia tightened her grip on the phone. She hadn't even been given the option to choose who she would be tonight. An hour later, the doorbell rang. Boxes, garment bags, jewelry cases. The dress was flawless, a deep, rich shade that accentuated her figure without being loud, elegant, controlled, dangerous in its perfection. The shoes looked as if they were made for dancing. The jewelry was subtle, expensive, unmistakable. Tonight, Livia was not meant to look like an assistant. She was meant to look like a woman standing beside a man of Sebastian's level. In front of the mirror, she barely recognized herself, and that scared her because it was beautiful. Too beautiful. At the corporate evening, Sebastian couldn't take his eyes off her. He noticed her immediately, the very second she entered the hall beside him. And something crossed his gaze that Livia had never seen before. Surprise. Real. Alive. She walked next to him, feeling his hand resting on her waist, his breath close to her temple. Around them were partners, investors, familiar faces, but the world narrowed to just those few steps they took together. She was invited to dance, at first politely, then more insistently. She accepted because she couldn't refuse, and every time she returned, she caught Sebastian's look, dark, tense, unmistakably jealous, as if he were forcing himself to stay where he stood. When another partner extended his hand toward her, Sebastian finally lost his restraint. He stepped forward. "Now it's my turn," he said, in a tone that made refusal impossible. He led her onto the dance floor. The music changed, then changed again, but he didn't let her go. His hand was firm, confident. Her palm trembled in his. "You have no idea," he leaned closer, his voice lower, "how much you're driving me crazy tonight." Livia closed her eyes. If he knew that all of this had started as a lie, he wouldn't be holding her like this. Or maybe he would, just so he would never have to let her go.
Late in the evening, one of Sebastian's partners offered to drive Livia home. "I'll order you a car," Sebastian said too sharply, almost coldly. "There's no need," the man replied with a polite smile. "I'm heading in that direction anyway." Livia felt the tension between them instantly, tight, electric, impossible to ignore. Sebastian looked at her as if he didn't want to let her go, not at all. "I'll text you when I arrive," she said softly, trying to smooth the moment. He didn't answer. He only nodded. But it wasn't agreement. It was a warning. As the car pulled away, Livia turned her head toward the window and saw Sebastian's reflection in the glass. He stood at the entrance of the venue, motionless, his fists clenched. Jealousy was almost tangible, and in that moment, Livia understood something terrifying. He was no longer in control of his feelings, and she was no longer in control of her lie. And the most dangerous part was still ahead, because if he was capable of jealousy now, what would happen when he learned the truth?
Livia woke up with the feeling that the night had never really ended. Her body was in her bedroom, wrapped in morning light, but her thoughts were still drifting somewhere between the mirrored halls of the corporate event, Sebastian's gaze, and the exact moment when he had let go of her hand. Something had changed. Not abruptly, not loudly, too subtly to accuse, but deeply enough to hurt. Sebastian was different, quieter, more controlled, colder. And that frightened her more than any confrontation ever could. At the office, he barely looked at her. His instructions were brief, professional, precise, as if every unnecessary second near her had been carefully erased. The distance between them had returned, solid and invisible, like a wall rebuilt overnight. The same wall where everything had once begun. Livia felt it in every breath she took. She knew it wouldn't last long. The truth never does. It waits, and then it finds you. The door closed softly behind Livia. The silence inside the office was thick, deliberate. This room was designed for power, for decisions made without witnesses. Sebastian's aunt did not stand up. She sat perfectly straight behind the desk, her posture flawless, her expression calm, almost bored. She didn't need to raise her voice. She never did. "You're losing focus," she said coolly, without greeting. Livia remained standing. "I'm doing my job," she replied, though her voice lacked the certainty it once had. A faint smile appeared on the woman's lips. Not kind, calculated. "Your job," she corrected, "was never about emotions." Livia clenched her hands. "You were supposed to make him fall in love and then disappear." Her words were precise, surgical. That was the agreement. Livia lifted her gaze. "I didn't plan for this," she said quietly. "It stopped being about money." The aunt tilted her head slightly, studying her. "He hates lies," she said calmly. "You know that better than anyone." The sentence landed like a verdict. "If you tell him the truth," she added, "you lose everything. If you don't, you finish what you started." Livia felt her chest tighten. "I can't keep playing," she whispered. "I love him." For the first time, something flickered in the aunt's eyes. Not sympathy, but impatience. "Love was never part of the contract," she said, "and neither was choice." The pressure in the room became unbearable. Livia closed her eyes. She understood now. This was never about helping Sebastian. It was about control. And she was trapped in the middle, between the man she loved and the truth that would destroy him. Sebastian stopped without realizing why. He hadn't meant to listen. He hadn't even known where he was going, only that he needed air, distance, silence. Then he heard his name, not spoken softly, not with affection, spoken like a term in a contract. He remained behind the half-closed door, frozen as voices carried through the quiet corridor. Money, an agreement, an ending already planned. "She will leave after," his aunt's voice said calmly, "as agreed." Sebastian felt something inside him crack, slowly, precisely, without mercy. Every moment replayed itself in his mind with brutal clarity. Her sudden appearance, her perfect timing, the way she never asked for more and yet always gave just enough. It hadn't been fate, it had been strategy. His hand tightened into a fist. He hated lies, always had, not because they hurt, but because they stole the truth he built his life on. The door opened. Livia stepped into the corridor and stopped. She saw him instantly. The look in his eyes told her everything. This was no misunderstanding, no doubt. This was knowledge. "Sebastian," she whispered. He didn't raise his voice, didn't move toward her. "How long?" he asked quietly. The question wasn't about time, it was about choice. Her silence answered for her. He nodded once, slowly. "So it was never real," he said, not accusing, stating a fact. "No," she breathed, tears breaking free. "I fell in love. I didn't want this anymore. I didn't want the game. For me," his voice low and controlled, "there is no game where truth should be." He stepped aside, opening the corridor behind him. "You're done here." Each word landed with finality. "And you are no longer part of my life." He turned and walked away. Livia remained standing in the corridor where everything ended. The contract was fulfilled, the lie was exposed, the love destroyed. And the question that would not leave her was the cruelest of all. Can something born from deception survive, even when it becomes real? Livia didn't cry anymore. The tears had stayed somewhere behind her, exhausted, empty, as if even they had given up. The days after Sebastian walked away blurred into one another. Mornings without purpose, evenings without meaning, silence that pressed against her chest harder than any words ever could. She no longer worked in the office, no longer had a reason to pass by the building, no longer had the right to say his name out loud. But she thought of him constantly. She replayed every look, every touch, every moment when he had tried to be careful with her, while she had been hiding the truth. Sebastian had disappeared too, not from the city, from her world. He stopped answering messages, stopped coming to places where he might see her, as if erasing her was the only way he could breathe again. For him, betrayal wasn't pain, it was a fracture. And yet, despite everything, Livia knew one thing with terrifying clarity. She would rather lose him forever than continue living inside a lie. If there was even the smallest chance to make things right, she would take it, even if it meant losing him a second time. Livia didn't cry anymore. The tears had stayed somewhere behind her, exhausted, empty, as if even they had given up. The days after Sebastian walked away blurred into one another. Mornings without purpose, evenings without meaning, silence that pressed against her chest harder than any words ever could. She no longer worked in the office, no longer had a reason to pass by the building, no longer had the right to say his name out loud. But she thought of him constantly. She replayed every look, every touch, every moment when he had tried to be careful with her, while she had been hiding the truth. Sebastian had disappeared too, not from the city, from her world. He stopped answering messages, stopped coming to places where he might see her, as if erasing her was the only way he could breathe again. For him, betrayal wasn't pain, it was a fracture. And yet, despite everything, Livia knew one thing with terrifying clarity. She would rather lose him forever than continue living inside a lie. If there was even the smallest chance to make things right, she would take it, even if it meant losing him a second time. Sebastian stopped a few steps away from her. Not because he didn't want to come closer, but because he was afraid that if he did, he wouldn't be able to stop. Livia stood in front of him, her hands trembling, her eyes full of everything she had been holding back for too long. "I didn't come to explain myself," she said quietly. "I came to tell you the truth, all of it, even if you never forgive me." He looked at her, really looked, not as a man betrayed, not as a man in control, but as someone who was still in pain. "I know how it started," she continued. "I know it was wrong. I know I should have walked away before it became real." Her voice broke. "But I didn't plan to love you. I didn't want to. And when I realized I did, it was already too late." She took a step closer. "I was ready to lose everything. The money, the job, my place in your life. I just couldn't live with the lie anymore." Silence wrapped around them. Sebastian clenched his jaw. For a long moment, he said nothing. "You destroyed the one thing I believed in," he finally said. "Truth." Livia nodded. "I know." Another pause. Then, softer. "But you didn't destroy my feelings," he admitted. "And that's what scares me the most." He exhaled slowly, as if letting go of something heavy. "I don't know if I can forget. I don't know if I can forgive you completely." He met her gaze. "But I know I don't want a life without you in it." Tears slid down Livia's cheeks. "I'll spend the rest of my life earning your trust," she whispered. "Not because I owe you, but because I choose you." Sebastian stepped forward at last. This time, he didn't hesitate. He pulled her into his arms, not urgently, not desperately, but with certainty, as if the decision had already been made. Their foreheads touched, breathing slowed, the world faded. This love hadn't started honestly, but it ended in truth. And sometimes that was enough to begin again.